to, be super peaceful and at one with yourself when you're in a cave and no one's bothering you. Right. You're like, I'm the most spiritually perfect person on the planet. But as soon as you leave your little cave and you encounter your first relationship or interaction with someone, right? It's the test. It's like, oh, let's see how your practice is actually working for you. Let's see how it's serving you. And so there's something about, I think, not being completely selfish and self-absorbed in your spiritual pursuits, that living in the real world, in the world that requires us to be of service and to put ourself not first, but to realize there is no self actually. Right. And so how can you put yourself first if there is no self? That makes you bring your spiritual experience, or makes you bring this practice into everyday moments in everyday life, and requires a great deal of trust and surrender, right? You can't rely on your own capabilities and capacities, because there's too much to do. There's too many people. There's too many relationships. There's so much to manage, right? So you have to, in some ways, like, release those attachments. And for me, that's always the real yoga. The real yoga isn't about creating this perfect structure to your life so that you can maintain the system. It's really about, disrupting that and then seeing what you're made of and seeing if you can maintain the balance of your mind when everything's in chaos.
I'm smiling because do you know this book by Jack Kornfield? It's called A Path with Heart. Does it ring a bell?
I've heard of it, yes.
You've
yeah, and I
it?
know some of Jack Kornfield's writing, yeah.
That's a great book. I'll bring it to you when you come to Madrid. I have it in the shower.
I love that.
I have it in English.
Ooh, excellent. Even better.
So you can actually understand. So this book, I was laughing because I remember the very first 2 pages of the book. The introduction is like, Jack says that he was in Southeast Asia, I think. That's where he spent years in the monastery doing like Buddhist meditation and all this, the spiritual disciplines, very structured and very orchestrated. And then he showed up in his hometown, which was, if I remember correctly, New York. And he came with this halo of nearly like an enlightened man. I've changed. I've done all these practices for this, 10 years. So, and then just to realize that he was still triggered by the same things that he used to be triggered 10 years before. And that gave him a lot to think about. And so what he did, he moved back to New York. He took on a job as a cab driver. He got involved with a woman, even in a romantic relationship. And he said, okay, now the real work starts.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, this is what I've been doing in Asia for this 10 years has been like something that I had to do, and that prepared me for this. This is like, the real deal.
Yeah. And I think I feel like there's a lot of benefit to having that time, like a little protected sanctuary where you get to go deep and you get to make it be all about you and your practice and your spiritual development and your pranayama and your meditation and your, right? Like there's something really beautiful about having that time, because most people on the planet don't have that time. And so it's both a privilege and a place of deep growth and deep sort of letting the roots go deep and letting yourself really be nurtured by those practices and that process. But I think that part too is really important, right? that if it only stays in that space, then you kind of miss the fruits of that period, right? It's like the tree doesn't grow. And so you almost have to come out and enter those challenging, spaces in order to be of service, in order to allow the fruits of that time, to make that time that was a privilege, that was part of your path and part of your journey, actually mean something. Otherwise, what does it mean? It's sort of useless, right?
It's a little bit like I used to call it the yoga bubble. When you're in Mysore, for example, and then you start jumping from one country to the other, and then you get, in a way, it might seem liberating for some time, but then I've seen people, friends, because I've never actually been in that bubble for a long time, but maybe I will.
Yeah.
In my 40s, who knows? Surprise. But I know people that have got stuck in like the traveling, and it's just interesting as well.
Yeah.
It's interesting as well.
Yeah.
You touched on something that I would like you to elaborate a little more on, which is self-absorption.
Yeah.
Because it's somewhat paradoxical that we are doing this practice to realize that there is no sense of I, or in a way to dissolve the sense of I, or like a deeply rooted sense of I coming from ideas, mind stuff, all these things. But then we become really self-centered.
Yeah.
Like my practice, what I eat, at what time I go to bed, don't talk to me at this time. Like we can become very particular.
Yes.
Very particular. So tell us about that.
Yeah, okay. Sure, let's talk about it. Yeah, I mean, again, it's always like both. It's always an and. But finding the balance between those two things, I think is really that's the yoga, right? I mean, and I always like to think yoga, we always talk about the definition being like union, to join, to bring together, right? We're trying to transcend the opposites, right? So in a way, there's a disjoining, right? A non-attachment that's happening, or a recognizing that like none of this is really lasting or permanent or that important. So there's like that experience you were talking about of coming back home into your city and feeling like, wow, I'm not really connected here in the same way I used to be. These things, these people, these places don't matter that much to me as they used to. But also there's a joining where we're letting go, yes, but we're also we also have to take on. We have to do the two at the same time, right? So to be in the world and not of the world, or to be of service, but not attached to the results of your your actions. And Krishna talks a lot about this in the Gita. And yeah, I think in a way, the practice, especially the rules, the systems that we kind of put in place, like I need to go to bed at 8:00, I mean, some of them are just for health purposes, maybe, right? If you're going to get up at 3 a.m, you should probably go to bed at 8 p.m. That's like kind of your minimum. Right? There's definitely certain kinds of food that are going to feel better in your body, that are going to you're going to digest more easily, that are going to create a sense of lightness and a sense of clarity in your mind and your body. All these things are real, like they're real things, and important. to our practice, whether it's an asana practice or a meditation practice. But when we get attached to these things, it becomes an obstacle, right? It becomes now we're the things, it's sort of that idea that the process is to lead us to the experience. But we get so attached to the process that we're missing the experience. And so then, in a way, we have to also be flexible with those things and realize that even though these things can support the experience, it can support our practice, it can support how we're feeling, it can support our sense of connection and clarity, that actually that connection and clarity is always there, right? We can't lose it. It's never something we need to create. It's always present. It's always there. And we can eliminate some things that might make us feel foggy or heavy or disconnected, right? And that can help us connect, feel that experience more easily. But I think once you know how to find that experience, once you know that it's always there, you realize it actually doesn't matter so much. The time you go to bed, the time you get up, the amount of asanas you do, the amount of time you meditate, the food you're eating, you realize, oh, it's always there. It's not going anywhere. It's not going away. But our minds are very tricky. And I think certain things that we do or don't do can put us into sort of not seeing clearly. And I think that's the whole point of yoga, is to see our experience clearly and see ourselves clearly and see each other clearly. And when we